future doctors. Welcome back to GCSE Best Medicines AQA Biology lecture series. In this lesson, we're going to be talking more about homeostasis. We've already introduced ourselves to homeostasis, and we have said that homeostasis is the ability of the body to be able to regulate its internal environment. For example, the regulation of blood glucose, which we have already finished, the regulation of temperature, the regulation of blood water levels, the regulation of blood toxin levels and waste products. All of those include homeostasis. So further on homeostasis, the first kind of homeostasis that we're going to do is temperature. Remember, temperature would, again, just like any other feature in homeostasis, would follow a negative feedback loop. Negative feedback is that something increases and it is followed by a decrease, or something decreases and it is followed by an increase. So in this case here, we're going to be talking about homeostasis of temperature. Before beginning this, I wanted to introduce you guys to skin. Why? Because skin is a very important organ that is involved in homeostasis of temperature. Because it contains structure like the sweat glands, right, the hair, the blood vessels, and so on, right? It also contains receptors for body temperatures. For the surface temperatures outside the skin. The body temperature or the blood temperatures receptors are actually present in the hypothalamus, the thermoregulatory center in the brain, okay? So let's have a look at the skin. The skin essentially contains two layers, a top layer and a bottom layer. The top layer of the skin is called the epidermis. Epi means on top, so hence the name, epidermis, and therefore the lower layer is called the dermis. Now, the skin as a whole contains a couple of structures. For example, it contains sweat glands, right? Remember, sweat is involved in cooling. The skin also contains hair follicles, and those hair follicles, as you can see, this shaft of hair here, is connected to a muscle. And that muscle is called the hair erector muscle, also called hair erector papillae. The hair erector muscle will contract and pull the air up. The skin also contains pain, temperature, and pressure receptors. The skin also contains subcutaneous fat that is under the dermis. And the skin contains blood vessels, of course, right? Have you ever seen someone blushing? That's due to the blood vessels present in the skin. So how does the homeostasis of temperature really work? Well, for that, we'll have to have a stimulus. We'll have to have a change. Change can either be an increase or a decrease. Let's say there is an increase in temperature away from normal. Remember, normal is around 37 degrees Celsius in humans. So there could be an increase in temperature. For example, when we go out in the sun, or we're exercising, or even when we're feverish. Stimulus, then, the change, then, would be that there has been an increase in temperature. This would increase the temperature of the body. This would also increase the temperature of the blood. And that blood will go to the brain. And what is in the brain? In the brain, we have the thermoreceptors in the hypothalamus. Thermo means heat. Receptors in the hypothalamus. So they will detect the increase in blood temperature, and they will cause a couple of changes to be made to correct that. For example, they will cause the body to increase its sweat production. How does sweat decrease the temperature of the body? Let's have a look. Have you studied physics? And in physics, have you studied something called latent heat of vaporization? If you know that, then you should assume that sweat essentially takes away energy, thermal energy, from the body as the water molecules escape. So how does this work? Let's have a look. So here's on the screen, you can see the skin. Here's the skin. Now on top of the skin, there's some sweat. Now here's the thing. As these sweat molecules absorb more and more heat from the body, they're going to escape. And that heat, as they escape, is taken in them. Okay? They gain that kinetic energy, that thermal energy, and they escape, taking away that kinetic energy as they change their state. That is called latent heat of vaporization. And water actually has a high latent heat of vaporization, which means it takes away a lot of energy, a lot of heat energy from the body as it cools, or as it vaporizes, as the body cools down. So this causes the body to cool down, and voila, helps in decreasing temperature. The brain will also try to decrease the metabolic rate. For example, decreasing the rate of aerobic respiration so that less heat energy is produced. The rate of breathing will increase. Why? To breathe in cool air and to exhale the hot air. And something very important would occur, and that is vasodilation. Vasodilation is something that occurs in the blood vessels of the skin. Have you ever seen somebody who has a really, really white skin, and they try to exercise? When they exercise, their skin, especially their cheeks, turn what color? Red, of course, right? Very pink and red. Why? Because the blood vessels in the skin, they dilate, okay? This causes blood to come near the top parts of the skin. So as blood comes near the top parts of our skin over here, this warms the skin at the very top, which results in heat loss through radiation as well as convection, okay? By heating the air molecules that are coming near the skin and causing them to go away. So radiation and convection following vasodilation, okay? Very simple. Now, if you don't know what latent heat of vaporization is, or if you don't know what convection and radiation are, you can book some lessons and we'll see what we can do, okay? And next up, so again, this would follow a decrease in temperature, and the temperature will go back to normal, that is 37 degrees Celsius. Now, just like body temperature can increase, body temperature can also decrease. This could occur due to cold environment, for example, cold showers, or if you go out hiking, go out in the snow, or the season changes, the climate changes, the weather changes, and so on. So, when there's a decrease in body temperature, then there is a decrease in blood temperature, and blood will travel, colder blood, slightly colder blood, will travel to the brain. And in the brain, again, we have what? We have thermoreceptors in the hypothalamus, right? Thermoreceptors in the hypothalamus will detect this and cause certain changes, cause the brain to cause certain changes in the body. One of them is vasoconstriction, right? How does vasoconstriction help? Let's have a look again. So remember, in the skin, you have blood vessels, and these blood vessels vasodilate to cause heat loss through radiation and convection. But if you constrict these vessels, right, if you cause the constriction of these vessels over here, then blood is no longer going to flow at the top. It's just going to stay near the main parts of the body, near the trunk. And so because the blood stays deeper inside, it stays warm, and it prevents heat loss through radiation, prevents heat loss through convection, okay? So vasoconstriction is one of the steps that follows following a decrease in body temperature. What about rate of metabolism? What do you think? Would rate of respiration, aerobic respiration, increase or decrease? Of course, aerobic respiration will increase to produce more thermal energy. And so that is the next point. You want to increase the respiration so that more thermal energy is produced. Metabolic rate will increase. What about sweat production? Do you want to produce sweat when your body is cold? No, right? So sweat production will increase or decrease? It will decrease to reduce heat loss by evaporation. Can you think of anything else that occurs when we're feeling cold? Maybe just come out of the shower? Shivering, right? Shivering. What is shivering and how does that help us cool down? Well, shivering causes muscle contractions throughout the body, and this causes respiration and therefore heat production, okay? Another very interesting thing that occurs is, remember the hair erector papillae muscle? They cause, when we're shivering, cause the hair to stand up, cause the hairs to rise. When the hair stands up, when the hair rises, this traps the air underneath. Now, this is not very significant in humans because we don't have that much hair. But for mammals, that, for example, bears, right? They have a lot of hair and they have a lot of fur. And so when that occurs, kind of like wearing a thicker sweater. Let me show you, right? So let's say this is a bear, right? And then this is his tummy, and all of these are hair here. So all of these are hair of the bear, right? So they are just hanging down, not really doing anything, minding their own business. And then what occurs is that suddenly the bear gets cold. When the bear gets cold, now what's going to happen is that these hair erector muscles underneath these hair are gonna contract, and they're gonna pull the hair shaft upwards, so that the hair shafts go ahead and stand up, increasing the volume that they occupy, increasing the amount of air that is trapped here underneath, right? So all the air is going to be accumulated in all of this huge space, a huge volume here. And remember, is air a good insulator or a bad insulator? Air is a good insulator. So you increase the trapping of air, which is going to insulate the bear. It's kind of like in situation 1, where you have smaller hair, or the hair is not standing up, you have lesser air trapped. It's kind of like wearing a thinner sweater. While in situation number 2, when you do have a lot of air trapped, it's kind of like wearing a thicker sweater, which is trapping more air, causing a better insulation. Okay? So that occurs in mammals. It does occur in humans, but we're not able to trap too much air because we don't have that much hair. Another thing that I've added here, it does not directly play a role in homeostasis because it is always there and you cannot really control it, right? You cannot increase or decrease its function. However, it's always there, so it's an adaptation really, rather than something that helps in homeostasis. And the adaptation is that some animals, or most animals actually, who live in a colder environment, for example, polar bears and seals and penguins, right? They have a thick layer of fat under their skin. That is the subcutaneous fat that we looked at when we were talking about the skin. So fat underneath the skin is a good insulator. Fat itself is a good insulator. Just like air is a good insulator, although air is a very good insulator, fat is also a good insulator. And so polar bears, for example, right, have a thick layer of fat and thick fur, and they both serve as insulators. Okay? And that concludes homeostasis of temperature. Next up, we have removal of waste products. Do you know any waste products? The human body makes many waste products which need to be removed from the body. Waste products can be removed through some of the following ways. For example, we can remove them by urinating, right? Just urinate them out, and that's it. Off you go. Excretion through sweat. We can also sweat them out, like water, right? We can sweat out water and salts. Exhalation through lungs. Remember, remove CO2, carbon dioxide through lungs, right? By exhaling it. Excretion in bile. We can also excrete things in bile. Remember bile that is made in the liver and helps in digestion of fats? Well, it also contains some other waste products. So some examples of waste products are discussed below. What are some of the waste products that the body makes that we need to remove? So number 1, we have carbon dioxide. Remember, carbon dioxide is a major waste product that is made by aerobic respiration. It travels by blood, eventually to the lungs. Right? It is either bound to red blood cells or as bicarbonate ions in the plasma, and it will reach the lungs. And then most of the CO2 will be exhaled by the lungs. Okay? Number 2, we have water. Water is another waste product of aerobic respiration. Excess water can be excreted in the urine by the kidneys. Also, it can be released through sweat, and some of it can even be exhaled by lungs. Really? Do you know about this? Do you know that we exhale water vapor all the time? Have you ever taken a breath exhaled in a very cold environment, for example, in the winters, and when you do it, you know, it kind of comes out as fog, right, like a smoke. That's actually water vapor very quickly condensing into water. Next up, we have excess mineral salts. So another waste product that we can have is excess mineral salts. These include excess sodium ions, potassium ions, chloride ions, calcium ions, etc. These are filtered by the kidneys. And these are excreted into the urine and also released by sweat. So kidneys will help in removing them most of the time, but they can also, a little bit of them can also be released by sweat. And at number 4, we have urea. Remember urea from the liver? Well, here it is again. Urea is a waste product that is released during deamination of excess amino acids as we convert them into what? Into glucose in the liver. So amino acids are converted into glucose, while urea is a waste product that is released. It is filtered by the kidneys most of the time. Most of urea is going to go out the kidneys, but some of it is also excreted by the sweat. Okay? Usually in a patient who has a declining kidney function, doctors usually test them for something called blood urea nitrogen levels. Okay? Remember, urea is not supposed to be in the blood all that much. So they test for blood urea levels, right? Blood urea nitrogen levels, BUN levels, to test for the kidney function. If there's too much BUN, then that's not good. That means that the kidney is not removing urea. Okay? So how does this urinary system work? How do the kidneys work? How are they able to play their role in homeostasis of waste products, such as water and urea? Well, the urinary system consists of the kidneys, of course, right? One on each side. Remember, the right kidney is a little bit lower than the left kidney because of the liver that is pressing on top of the right kidney. Kidneys, they produce the urine. Then we got the 2 ureters. These tubes here that you see that are coming out of the kidneys, right, and they're going to take the urine to the bladder. These are called the ureters. And then eventually that's going to go into the bladder. Okay, so the bladder. The bladder essentially is just a balloon-like sac. It's very elastic, and it can increase and decrease in size depending on how much urine is in it. The bladder stores the urine until we're able to go to the bathroom. Once we're at the bathroom, then the urethra allows the urine to go out. So the last part is called the urethra. The urethra on top of it has some muscles over here and over here. And these muscles control how much, when we're supposed to urinate, when the urine is allowed through the urethra. And of course, normally you don't want the urine to go outside until you're at the bathroom. So not only do the kidneys remove waste products, they also help control the osmolarity of the blood, the concentration of the blood. And this is driven in part by ADH, antidiuretic hormone. And we'll talk, this will be mentioned again, and we'll talk more about this again. They also help regulate blood pH. A little bit of an extra information. The blood pH normally hangs around 7.4, okay? 7.4. Anything above 7.45 is said to be an alkaline pH, and anything below 7.35 is an acidic pH and not good. Now, I have a little bit of an extra info. I wanted to question you guys about your clinical sense here. So I've added this question because you guys want to be doctors, right? So do you guys remember what a blood centrifuge is from the cardiovascular system chapter? I told you guys to remember this because I will be asking a clinical question related to this. A blood centrifuge. Well, the question is, here's a little bit of information first. So the kidneys, they secrete some hormones to stimulate the bone marrow. Remember that all the blood cells come from the bone marrow stem cells. It stimulates the bone marrow to produce a lot of red blood cells and platelets. Now here's the thing. In cancers of the kidney, we have too much of kidney tissue, so we have too much of this hormone, and so we have too many red blood cells. As we have too many red blood cells, what part of blood, plasma or Buffy coat or hematocrit, any of these 3 parts, would this increase in a patient with renal cell cancer? What do you think? So how are the kidneys able to regulate the blood toxin levels? How are they able to remove these waste products? For this, we have to understand the kidney's major functional unit. kidneys actually have very small functional units called nephrons, and those nephrons are able to filter out the waste products and maintain the blood water levels, maintain the salt levels, maintain the concentration, and again filter the excess water as well as any other waste products. So those nephrons kind of look like this. And before we come into this, let's have a look at the kidney. So again, the kidney contains nephrons, and to the nephrons we have to deliver the blood. So here's the nephron, and to the nephron we have to deliver the blood, right? So what happens essentially is that the kidney has an artery. Do you remember what artery supplies the kidney? It is the renal artery. So renal artery is going to come in and bring in the unfiltered blood containing the waste products to the kidney. And this is going to go ahead and divide into many different branches. And those branches are going to go into the renal, into the kidney, okay? No need to know any of the detailed names. And in the kidneys, you would have nephrons, right? You would have these. So that artery divides essentially into smaller arterioles, and we call them, you don't need to know this name for the sake of AQA, but we call them afferent arterioles. If you are going to take biology in A levels, then this is important. Afferent arterioles, and then the ones that will take away the blood are called efferent arterioles. Now, the way this works is that the afferent arteriole brings in the blood, and efferent arteriole is going to take away the blood from the nephron. So where is this blood going? It is going actually essentially into the capillary bed, a jumble of capillaries, a mixture of capillaries over here. And these capillaries contain these holes that I'm drawing. So all these capillaries is called something called the glomerulus, right? So blood is coming through the afferent arterioles, unfiltered blood is coming through the afferent arteriole to the glomerulus. And the glomerulus contains capillaries that have holes in them. So through these holes, stuff that is present inside the unfiltered blood is going to start leaving, right? Stuff is going to start leaving outside. And it's going to enter this thing here that is the beginning portion of the nephron. So what are some of the things that leave, right? Let's have a look in a bit. Also, this is assisted by the efferent arteriole being thinner than the afferent arteriole. If you look at this, this is a bit thinner and this is a bit wider. Why? Because this increases the pressure on the inside of the glomerulus. So the glomerular pressure is going to increase. This increases pressure. And on top of this, it's got those narrow slits inside the capillaries through which materials, small materials, very small materials, can escape. So what are the things that are initially removed from the blood and enters into the nephrons of the kidneys? Let's have a look. So again, in the nephron, you have an afferent arteriole bringing in unfiltered blood, and it is entering into this glomerulus. In this glomerulus, you have narrow slits and you have increased pressure. Why? Because the efferent arteriole, which is taking the blood away from the glomerulus, is thin, which increases pressure inside the glomerulus. So things are going to start leaking out. What things? Small things that are able to pass through those small holes that are present inside the glomerulus, the glomerular capillaries. The very small stuff that is present in the blood would not include cells, right? Cells are very big. White blood cells, red blood cells, platelets, they will not leave. Proteins are also very big. So any proteins are not supposed to leave the glomerulus. What the initial filtrate contains is very small molecules such as water. Okay. What else is small in the blood? Water, glucose, right? Glucose is a very small molecule. Remember, it's a monosaccharide. It's a single sugar. Amino acids are very small. Amino acids are also able to leave. Urea is a waste product. That also leaves. Carbon dioxide in the form of bicarbonate ions also leaves. And any mineral ions that are supposed to leave also leave, like chloride ions, right? Sodium ions, potassium ions, and so on. So that is the initial filtrate, and you are expected to memorize the initial filtrate. What is initially excreted from, not excreted, but filtered from the glomerulus into the nephron. And that is the initial filtrate, and that contains some good things, some useful products like glucose and amino acids, right? That's not supposed to go into the urine. So the initial filtrate contains water, glucose, amino acids, urea, bicarbonate ions, chloride, sodium, potassium ions, and so on. Now what happens is that because we cannot let glucose and amino acids and most of the water here to leave the blood, what we do is we select them, we pick them up from this urine, the initial urine and initial filtrate, and we put them back into the body. So again, here's the body, and that's the nephron, and the nephron is making urine. So you want to reabsorb the glucose and amino acids. So any glucose, any amino acids, they'll just be reabsorbed back into the blood, okay? And a lot of the water as well. And that occurs in the proximal part of the kidney. And this portion here kind of looks very convoluted, right? This proximal part. The proximal means initial, right? So this proximal part here, this is called the proximal, a little bit convoluted, right? Zigzag. We call this the proximal convoluted tubule, and that is where the stuff is reabsorbed. So proximal convoluted tubule, where what occurs? The occurrence of selective reabsorption of glucose and amino acids. So selective reabsorption of glucose and amino acids. And now the urine will only contain water and urea and other waste products such as excess mineral salts. And it's going to go past down all these tubules, and as the urine becomes concentrated and more ready, and eventually it reaches into a site where it's supposed to be collected. Right? Here it will be collected. And eventually this collecting tubule is going to take it to this middle part here, right? So you have collecting tubules coming in from all portions of the kidneys and eventually depositing the finalized urine into this big area here, from where it's going to enter into the ureter. So these collecting tubules are called collecting tubules, right? They're just called collecting tubules. So for GCSE AQA, our main areas of the nephron that we need to know are proximal convoluted tubule and the collecting tubule. Proximal convoluted tubule is involved in selective reabsorption of the initial filtrate, the reabsorption of glucose and amino acids so that they don't go into the urine. And the collecting tubule is the one that receives the finalized urine, right? So this is called the collecting tubule. Now here's the thing, the collecting tubule cells are also involved in concentrating or diluting the urine, and we need to know more about those. Why? Because those are involved in homeostasis of the blood water levels. So this needs a little bit of a background. What is a blood water level anyways, right? Well, remember the blood vessel, right? The blood vessel contains blood, and you want the blood to be at a particular concentration, right? You want a sufficient amount of water here and sufficient amount of other things, other solutes, so that the concentration is pretty much at a homeostatic level, at a normal level. But in case this increases, right, if the concentration increases, then the blood becomes concentrated, right? Hyperosmolar. The concentration can also decrease. For example, if you stop drinking water, if you're dehydrated, or sweat out a lot of water, the concentration can increase. And if you drink a lot of water, if you have too much water on the inside of the blood, then the blood is dilute, and that means decreased concentration. So increased concentration due to dehydration, for example, decreased concentration of blood due to a lot of water drinking or not producing enough urine, for example. Now, both of these will be detected by the hypothalamus, right? So the blood is going to go into the hypothalamus in the brain, and the brain has osmoreceptors, hypothalamus, has osmoreceptors. Osmo means osmolarity or concentration, receptors. And these osmoreceptors are going to detect the concentration of the blood. If the blood concentration is too dilute, then the osmoreceptors cause the pituitary gland. Remember the pituitary gland? Right. They cause the pituitary gland to release the hormone that is going to decrease diuresis, decrease water in the urine. And that is called the anti-diuretic hormone. So they're going to release ADH, anti-diuretic hormone, which is going to stop diuresis. So what does it do? Well, this ADH is going to go and target cells of the collecting tubule. Let's have a look at how this works. So again, you have the urine coming in. So all this is the urine. And then you have cells here, right? So here's a cell, and then here's a cell, and so on. And they have the nuclei and everything. Now, ADH is going to come in. Here's ADH. ADH comes into these cells, and these cells have receptors for ADH, right? So ADH is going to come in, and it binds to these receptors. So here's a receptor, and there's a receptor. ADH comes in, binds to the cells of the collecting tubule. Now they stimulate the cell. ADH stimulates the cells to send channels for water to move back into the body, right? Again, ADH stimulates cells to send channels near the collecting tubule, on the side of the collecting tubule, to take water back into the body. So channels are going to go over here. Pores are going to form for water, so that water can move from the urine back into the body. And water, surely enough, is going to start moving in to the body, okay? Now these channels, because they form pores for water, these channels are called aqua for water and porins, right? Aquaporins. ADH stimulates the collecting tubule cells to increase the numbers of aquaporins so that water can move back into the blood. Can you tell me now, if water moves back into the blood, does it increase or decrease the blood water levels? Of course, it's going to increase the blood water levels. It's going to decrease the blood's concentration. It's going to make the blood pressure also rise a little bit, right? So ADH goes and increases aquaporins, which results in reabsorption of water, right? Reabsorption of water. Easy? And that will mean that blood water levels rise or fall? Rise, right? Now the opposite would occur if the blood concentration decreases. If the blood concentration decreases and blood becomes very dilute, then you want to decrease the amount of ADH, right? You want to decrease the amount of aquaporins so that you can remove the water from the body. And so in that case, the hypothalamus, which contains the osmoreceptors, will detect the decreased concentration of the blood, and they will stimulate the pituitary gland to stop releasing ADH, which means that there is lesser aquaporins and lesser reabsorption of water, and the blood water levels will fall. Okay, back to normal. A decrease in concentration. What if a kidney fails? What happens to a person if a kidney fails? What can we do to help a person whose kidney is failing? So let's have a look at what can happen to a person if their kidneys start to fail and what can cause kidney failure. Number one, well, if you have kidney failure, not you, but somebody else, a patient has kidney failure, their toxins are going to build up, right? Urea is going to build up, all the other toxins are going to build up in the blood. Also, they won't be able to regulate their ion balance and their concentration of blood, which would cause cells through osmosis. For example, if too much water entering the cells, that is harmful, and too much water leaving the cells is also harmful. So that can cause a lot of damage and potentially lead to death. Now, historically, kidney failure was fatal, but nowadays, because of modern medicine, we have two primary treatments. One of them is called dialysis. You probably heard of this. Dialysis essentially is just a machine that carries out the kidney's function. So we have a dialyzer that is a machine and that carries out the filtration part of the kidneys by itself. Number two, we have the kidney transplant. You can just get a new kidney, just like we had the heart transplant. We find a donor for the kidney and then we replace the kidney. And this is much easier to find than a heart donor, because a heart is just one, but kidneys we have two, right? One kidney can compensate for the loss of the other, but a heart, of course, we only have one, so a person has to die for one to get another heart. So dialysis, how does dialysis work? Dialysis works on the principles of osmosis and diffusion again. Essentially, for dialysis, you'll have a patient that has a failing kidney. His kidneys or her kidneys are not working very well. You take them to the hospital, and what would happen is that they put them on dialysis, which is a machine that they connect, and they take the unfiltered blood from the person and put it in that machine. It goes through the machine, it is cleaned, and then returned to the body. So here's, for example, unfiltered blood going to the dialyzer, and it's returning, right? You can ignore all this. Just consider all of this as the dialyzer or the dialysis machine. The most important part of the dialysis machine is where the dialysis fluid is going to be, which is going to be here, all right? So that's the dialysis fluid. Now we're going to zoom in on this and try to see how the process actually works. So this is called the dialysis fluid, and you need to know, for the sake of AQA GCSE examinations, the contents of dialysis fluid. So let's have a look. Here's a chamber that they have made, and this chamber contains a partially permeable membrane. And this membrane contains two fluids. Number one, you have the blood. So on the left side, you're going to have the blood that is coming in from the person that is unfiltered. And on the right side, you're going to have a fluid, right? So on the right side, you're going to have a fluid. And this fluid is the dialysis fluid that contains no waste products, right? So this dialysis fluid, no waste products. But it contains glucose and amino acids. So what will happen here is that all the good stuff, for example, glucose and amino acids, that's not going to leave the blood as the blood goes down, right? So the blood is going down this way, and usually dialysis fluid is going down the other way to increase the rate of exchange. And all the good stuff that I've drawn in green, such as the glucose and amino acids, is not leaving. Okay? But any waste products here, right? Any waste products in the beginning, they're going to start diffusing. For example, urea is going to diffuse across the partially permeable membrane from the blood into the dialysis fluid. Okay? Now the dialysis fluid will quickly be removed as it's going down that way. Fresh dialysis fluid is going to come in down this way and replace the already used up dialysis fluid. This maintains the concentration gradient. The other feature that we have is that it has a partially permeable membrane that allows only small molecules like urea and creatinine and mineral salts to go through. It does not allow any cells to go through. And the dialysis machine would have a large surface area at the point of exchange. So three features that one can think of. Number one, dialysis fluids compensation. The dialysis fluids compensation is that it does not contain any waste products. It contains glucose and amino acids, for example, in the normal quantities, but it does not contain any waste products, so that the waste products can diffuse across the membrane. Number two, it contains very thin, partially permeable membrane, which does not allow any red blood cells, for example, or white blood cells or proteins to leak out. Number three is that fresh dialysis fluid is always coming in and the used one is always leaving, so that we have a concentration gradient that is maintained. There's also something other, something very special. which is that the direction of the blood and the direction of the fluid is opposite to one another. This is called counter current flow. The mechanism of how this increases exchange is not in your syllabus, but we call that counter current flow or counter current exchange. Okay, so moving in opposite directions is called counter current, obviously, as the name suggests, exchange, which increases the rate of exchange. Now, I have listed all of these features down in your neat notes, so let's have a read of them. Okay, so a dialysis machine cleans the blood by passing it through a partially permeable membrane, where it interacts directly with the dialysis fluid across a partially permeable membrane. Now, here's the thing. The dialysis fluid matches the concentration of useful substances in healthy blood, but it does not match the concentration of waste products. So what is the composition of the dialysis fluid? That's, again, high yield, very important. It has the same concentration of glucose and mineral ions as in the blood, but there's no urea or other waste products. It does not contain any large plasma proteins or blood cells. Okay? How does dialysis work? I've just explained this. Dialysis fluid aims to remove excess urea and mineral ions while retaining useful substances like glucose. The dialysis fluid's composition ensures that no net loss of glucose and it maintains normal mineral ion levels through diffusion. Since dialysis fluid lacks urea, a concentration gradient facilitates its removal from the blood. Now, here's the thing. When somebody is on dialysis, they have to manage their protein and salt intake to try to minimize the amount of urea and mineral ions that they build up in their blood before they have their dialysis session, right? Also, dialysis can be performed in hospitals or at home. You don't need special environments for this, like an operation theater. You can have it at home. And some patients use body internal methods that don't even require bulky machines. So what are some of the advantages of dialysis over a kidney transplant? And that is very high yield. So board examiners, they like you to know about the advantages of dialysis over kidney transplant, as well as disadvantages of dialysis. So let's have a look. Number one, dialysis is immediately available for patients in need of urgent treatment, right? Kidneys might not always be available. For example, there's a person who is in an emergency situation and they want the blood to be filtered very, very quickly, right? You cannot wait for a donor to show up and wait for the matching process to eventually book an OR and get the surgeon and then do the surgery, right? That cannot occur that quickly. However, dialysis is always there, so you can just put the patient on dialysis very quickly in 5 minutes and voila. So it is immediately available. There's no need for taking immunosuppressive medication. Remember in transplants, for example, in heart transplants even, the transplant recipients were taking immunosuppressive medication to try to prevent the immune system from attacking the organ. So there is no need for taking immunosuppressive medication, which decreases the risk for infections. There's also no need for wait for a compatible donor, of course, because it's not a transplant. Dialysis can be performed in various settings. You don't always need an OR. It can also it can be a temporary solution for patients waiting for a kidney transplant, and usually this is what occurs. People who are looking for a permanent solution, they usually find a donor, maybe their sibling, and until they have that surgery, they're constantly doing dialysis. Now, what are the disadvantages of dialysis? Number one, it demands a strict diet. So you're supposed to have a controlled diet which decreases the amount of urea that you're producing. The sessions are also lengthy, right? It's time consuming and regular, so all the time, you have this schedule and you lose a lot of time just going to the session and attending the session itself and so on. And there's fatigue between sessions because as the toxins build up in between sessions, you're going to have a fatigue. Dialysis is expensive in the long run. Every time you do dialysis, maybe not so much in the UK for people who at least have dialysis on the free healthcare through the NHS, but in other countries especially, it's going to be very expensive in the long run. Frequent exposure to needle penetration does increase the risk of infections, but it's not as bad as taking immunosuppressive medications, because mild infections can cause a serious symptoms in immunosuppressant individuals. Okay, so despite these challenges, dialysis acts as an artificial kidney, sustaining life for those with kidney failure. What about kidney transplant? Of course, you guys know what a kidney transplant is, right? Usually what we do is we put a kidney in a person in the groin. So here's a person, right? And then the person is supposed to have a kidney here and a kidney here. Now here's what occurs. You might imagine that in the kidney transplant, you take this kidney out and put a kidney in, right? That's not actually what occurs. What occurs is that, most of the time, what occurs is that you have a kidney that is placed in the groin here somewhere, okay, and attached to arteries. Kind of like having 3 kidneys. Okay, so kidney transplant. Diseased kidneys can be replaced by a matching donor kidney to give a complete cure to kidney failure. A donor kidney is connected to blood vessels in the groin. Okay? I'll probably not be questioned about this though. Sometimes the antigens on the donor kidneys do not completely match, and you can result in immune system recognizing the donor kidney as foreign and resulting in transplant rejection. So you want to minimize the risk of transplant rejection. Again, remember, what transplant rejection is that the recipient's immune system recognizes donor antigens as foreign and attacks it. That is called transplant rejection. Now, to decrease the risk of transplant rejection, you can lower the strength of the immune system. If you decrease the strength of the immune system, of course, it's going to decrease the risk of rejection. And so people who have transplant rejection, they take immunosuppressant medications for life. Not just transplant rejections, but have any transplants. So what are the advantages of transplants over dialysis? Well, number one, it's a one-time procedure, right? You don't need to go to the hospital every day, and you don't want the toxins to build up in your body all the time, right? In between the sessions, the toxins are going to build up and give you fatigue. So there's no fatigue involved. It's a one-time procedure. It completely cures the condition and so on. So that's pretty handy and pretty good. So people tend to do it when this becomes available. There's also no restriction in diet, right? Disadvantages of transplant. Well, it takes a long time, right? It's very difficult to find a donor, book the OR, get the surgeon in. So it cannot be performed at any time, right? Any settings can only be performed in a hospital setting. You cannot do it, unlike dialysis, in your homes. Also, you have to take these immunosuppressive medications, which will increase the risk of infections. So I think if this comes up for 2 marks, I would write the first one and most probably the second one, right? These two for 2 marks. And for this one, I would write probably this one here and this one here. The first one and the third one, okay? And that's pretty much it for this chapter number 5. Congratulations. We only have 2 more chapters to go, and you guys are doing really well. So keep this up. And yeah, keep taking notes. So if you guys want to reach out to us, you want to ask any questions, just use the comments. You want to reach out to book any lessons for any sciences, for A-levels as well as GCSEs, just reach us out using the WhatsApp link provided below, okay? And I'll see you guys in the next one, chapter 6.